r/NoSleep. The Ritual of Reflection, Shadows Beyond the Mirror. This is the story of how I learned the price of curiosity, and how I almost didn't make it back from the other side of the mirror. It all started on a sleepless night, scrolling through the dim glow of my phone. I had stumbled upon a strange forum filled with rituals, urban legends, and eerie stories. One post caught my eye: The Ritual of Reflection, Enter the Shadow Realm. The instructions were unsettlingly specific, promising that by performing the steps correctly, one could swap places with their reflection. The author claimed that this ritual allowed you to explore the shadowy world behind the mirror. It was ridiculous, of course. But it was 2 a.m., and I was bored enough to try anything. Besides, I reasoned, the worst that could happen was scaring myself half to death. I followed the instructions. 1. Turn off all the lights in the room. Darkness must be absolute. 2. Place a lit candle in front of the mirror and sit cross-legged in front of it. 3. Close your eyes and focus on your breathing for 3 minutes, visualizing your reflection coming alive. 4. Open your eyes and stare into the reflection's eyes without blinking for as long as you can manage. 5. Whisper the chant, Speculum umbri, meum alterum, aperi portas tenebrarum. Aperi portas tenebrarum. Repeat it until you feel the shift. I was skeptical but intrigued. I gathered a candle and placed it on the bathroom counter. I turned off the lights, plunging the room into near-complete darkness except for the small, flickering flame. Sitting cross-legged on the cold tile floor, I closed my eyes and began to breathe deeply. At first, it was peaceful. The room was silent except for the faint crackle of the candle. When I opened my eyes, the reflection in the mirror seemed normal at first, just me, staring back. I whispered the chant softly. Speculum umbri, meum alterum, aperi portas tenebrarum. Aperi portas tenebrarum. Nothing happened. I repeated it again, louder this time, my voice trembling slightly. The candle light began to flicker more violently, casting strange, distorted shadows across the walls. My reflection's eyes seemed wrong. They were darker, almost hollow. The longer I stared, the less it felt like I was looking at myself. Speculum umbri, meum alterum, aperi portas tenebrarum. Suddenly, my reflection smiled. Not a friendly smile, but something twisted and unnatural. My heart pounded as I tried to look away, but I couldn't. The reflection began to move, slowly at first, tilting its head, raising a hand. I hadn't moved, yet it raised its palm to the glass. Without thinking, I raised mine to meet it. The instant our hands touched, the room grew impossibly cold. My breath fogged the mirror. The candle went out. When the darkness lifted, I wasn't in my bathroom anymore. The air was heavy, damp, and stifling. I stood in an empty, colorless version of my house. Everything was wrong. The walls shimmered faintly, as if they were made of liquid glass. Shadows pooled unnaturally in the corners, writhing like living things. I spun around to face the mirror, hoping to see my reflection, but instead, I saw it, the thing wearing my face. It stood on the other side, mimicking my movements. But as I watched, it grinned widely, far too wide for a human face, and then began to move on its own. It waved at me. Slowly. Mockingly. Then it turned and walked away, leaving me trapped. Panic set in. I pounded on the glass, shouting for it to stop, to come back. The shadowy figures in the corners began to inch closer. They didn't walk or crawl, they flowed, like smoke or ink, converging toward me. Their whispers filled the air, unintelligible but suffocating. I remembered the chant and shouted it at the top of my lungs. Speculum umbri, meum alterum, aperi portas tenebrarum. The shadows recoiled slightly but didn't stop. Desperately, I raised my hand to the mirror again, pressing my palm against the cold glass. I focused on the reflection of my house, on the flickering candle, on returning. The glass beneath my hand burned like ice. My vision blurred as the shadows closed in. Then, with a deafening crack, the mirror shattered. I gasped and sat bolt upright. I was back in my bathroom, sprawled on the floor. The candle was nothing but a stub, wax pooled on the counter. But the mirror wasn't shattered. It was perfectly intact, and my reflection stared back at me, normal, tired, and pale. I sighed in relief. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I had fallen asleep and dreamed the whole thing. As I stood up and reached for the light switch, my reflection moved faster than I did. It didn't turn off the light. It just stood there, watching, smiling that too wide smile. And that's when I realized, the thing in the mirror hadn't switched places with me. It was still there. waiting, watching for its next chance to cross over. I froze, my hand hovering over the light switch. The reflection's smile grew wider, its head tilting at an unnatural angle. My breath caught in my throat. It shouldn't be moving, it shouldn't be there, not like this. I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion. I'd been reading creepy stories all night and playing with rituals that probably warped my imagination. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't normal, and it wasn't just in my head. I forced myself to flip the light switch. The bathroom flooded with warm yellow light, chasing away the eerie darkness. When I turned back to the mirror, the reflection was normal. Just me, standing there, my face pale and strained. A shaky laugh escaped me. "You're just tired," I whispered to myself, trying to ground my spiraling thoughts. "Get some sleep, and you'll forget this ever happened." But as I left the bathroom and climbed into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't the usual paranoia that comes with reading scary stories at night, it felt real. My skin prickled, and every creak of the house sent my heart racing. I closed my eyes and tried to force myself to sleep, but I couldn't shake the image of the grinning reflection. I woke up to the sound of glass shattering. It wasn't the soft tinkle of a small object breaking, it was loud, violent, like a window or a mirror had exploded. I bolted upright, my heart pounding. The room was dark, but I could see faint shadows moving across the walls. They shouldn't have been there, the room was still, and there was no source of light to cast them. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, but it didn't reach the corners of the room. The shadows seemed to twist and retreat, as if avoiding the light. I got out of bed, trembling, and stepped cautiously toward the hallway. The sound had come from the bathroom. My hand hesitated on the doorknob. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run, but something pulled me forward. The bathroom was dark when I opened the door, but the faint glow of the streetlight outside illuminated the shattered pieces of the mirror on the floor. My stomach sank. The mirror wasn't just broken, it looked like something had burst through it. The edges were jagged and warped, as if the glass had melted around whatever had escaped. I wasn't alone. I felt it before I saw it, a cold, suffocating presence that seemed to fill the room. My breath fogged in the air, and a soft, raspy whisper echoed around me. "You called me. You opened the door." My phone light flickered, and for a split second, I saw it, a twisted figure standing in the corner. It was humanoid but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its face stretched into a grotesque grin that mirrored the one my reflection had worn. Its eyes were dark, empty voids that seemed to swallow the light. I stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the tub and falling hard onto the tile. The figure stepped forward, its movements jerky and unnatural, as if it wasn't used to its own body. "You're on the wrong side," it rasped, its voice a sickening mix of my own and something far darker. "You don't belong here." I scrambled to my feet and ran, slamming the bathroom door behind me. My hands shook as I fumbled with my phone, frantically searching for the ritual instructions. There had to be a way to undo this, to send it back. The post had mentioned a reversal ritual, a way to force whatever crossed over back into the mirror. But it required time, materials, and, worst of all, confrontation. I needed to lure it back to the mirror and trap it inside. The first step was a reflective surface. The bathroom mirror was destroyed, but I remembered the full-length mirror in my bedroom closet. I grabbed the candle from the bathroom counter, lit it with shaking hands, and placed it in front of the closet mirror. The room was silent except for the faint crackle of the flame. The chant was similar but slightly altered. Speculum umbri, meum alterum, reverter ad tenebras. Reverter ad tenebras. I sat cross-legged in front of the mirror, just like before, and began to chant. My voice was barely above a whisper at first, but I forced myself to keep going, growing louder with each repetition. The air grew colder, and the shadows in the room began to writhe and shift. The figure appeared in the doorway, its grin stretching impossibly wide. It didn't walk, it glided, its movements smooth and unnatural. The closer it came, the harder it was to breathe, as if it were draining the air from the room. It stopped just inches from the mirror, tilting its head as it stared at me. "You can't send me back," it hissed. "You brought me here. This world is mine now." I didn't stop chanting. I couldn't. The mirror began to shimmer, its surface rippling like water. The creature's grin faltered, replaced by something that looked like fear. It raised a hand, reaching for me, but its movements were sluggish, as if something were pulling it back. The shadows in the room surged forward, wrapping around the creature and dragging it toward the mirror. It screamed, A terrible, inhuman sound that made my ears ring and my vision blur. I squeezed my eyes shut and kept chanting, louder and louder, until I felt the air shift. When I opened my eyes, the creature was gone. The mirror's surface had returned to normal, and the room was silent once more. For weeks after, I avoided mirrors. I couldn't bring myself to look at my reflection for more than a few seconds, terrified that I might see something staring back. I deleted the ritual post from my bookmarks and promised myself I would never touch anything like that again. But the fear never truly went away. Sometimes, late at night, I hear faint whispers coming from the bathroom. Sometimes, when I glance at a mirror out of the corner of my eye, I think I see my reflection grinning when I'm not. And sometimes, when the room is quiet and still, I can feel it waiting. Because the door isn't fully closed. And I don't know if it ever will be.